Frederick Jackson Turner was an American historian in the early 20th century. He promoted interdisciplinary and quantitative methods, often with a focus on the Midwest. He believed the spirit and success of the United States was directly tied to the country's westward expansion. His frontier thesis argued that moving the western frontier shaped American democracy and the American character from the colonial era until 1890. The Whiskey Rebellion was the first real test of the United States government authority to enforce federal laws. In western Pennsylvania, people consumed a lot of whiskey. The federal government passed a tax on whiskey in 1791. Farmers in western Pennsylvania refused to pay the tax, saying that it was like the Stamp Act all over again. Trouble brewed for a couple of years until 1794, when farmers assaulted federal tax collectors. President George Washington called out the national militia to put down what came to be called the Whiskey Rebellion. Many people were arrested, but were either later pardoned or found not guilty. The Monroe Doctrine was a proclamation in 1823 by President James Monroe that warned European nations not to get involved in political matters in Central and South America. The doctrine was intended to show that the United States was the only country that could influence such political matters. Several countries in South America had recently undergone revolutions against their European colonial owners and ended up creating republican governments. The United States agreed with their political philosophy and did not want to see those newly freed nations become European colonies again.
The Lewis and Clark expedition was the first American expedition to cross the western portion of the United States, departing in May 1804 from near St. Louis on the Mississippi River, making their way westward to the Pacific coast. The expedition was commissioned by President Thomas Jefferson shortly after the Louisiana Purchase, an attempt to explore and map the newly acquired territory, find a practical route across the western half of the continent, and establish an American presence in the territory before Britain and other European powers tried to claim it. The Indian Removal Act was passed by Congress on May 28, 1830, during the presidency of Andrew Jackson. This gave the federal government the power to relocate any Native Americans in the East to territory that was west of the Mississippi River. This relocation was called the Trail of Tears, and many natives died of cold, disease, and lack of food during the 116-day journey. Though the Native Americans were to be compensated, this was not always done fairly, and in some cases led to further destruction of many of the already diminishing numbers of the eastern tribes. The Battle of the Alamo, February 23 to March 6, 1836, was a vital event in the Texas Revolution. Following a 13-day siege, Mexican troops under Santa Anna launched an assault on the Alamo, killing all of the Texan defenders. Santa Anna's cruelty during the battle inspired many Texans, both Texas settlers and adventurers from the United States, to join the Texan army. Holding on to the desire for revenge, the Texans defeated the Mexican army at the Battle of San Jacinto on April 21, 1836, ending the Revolution.
Robert Fulton was an American engineer and inventor who developed the first successful steamboat called Clermont. That steamboat went from New York City to Albany with passengers. In 1800, he was called by Napoleon Bonaparte to design the first practical submarine in history. He is also credited with inventing some of the world's earliest naval torpedoes for use by the British Royal Navy. The Louisiana Purchase was the acquisition of the Louisiana Territory, a total of 828,000 square miles, by the United States from France in 1803. Although the purchase was debated as unconstitutional, President Jefferson went ahead with it. The U.S. paid $15 million for the land that includes what is now all of Arkansas, Missouri, Iowa, Oklahoma, Kansas, and Nebraska, and parts of Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, New Mexico, Texas, Montana, Wyoming. The War of 1812 was a war between the United States and Great Britain caused by American outrage over the imprisonment of American sailors by the British seizure of American ships, and British aid to the Indians attacking the Americans on the Western Front. This war gave the United States an excuse to seize the British Northwest Posts and to annex Florida from Spain. It strengthened American nationalism and encouraged the growth of industry.
Andrew Jackson was the 7th President of the United States. As president, he faced a threat of secession from South Carolina over the Tariff of Abominations. In contrast to many of his successors, he denied the right of a state to secede from the Union or to nullify federal law. The nullification crisis was ended when the tariff was amended and Jackson threatened to use force if a state attempted to secede. Congress attempted to reauthorize the Bank of the United States several years before the charter ended. He vetoed the renewal of its charter in 1832 and ended it. Jackson's presidency marked the beginning of the creation of the spoils system in American politics. Also, he supported the Indian Removal Act, which relocated a number of native tribes. The Erie Canal is one of the longest Great American Canals built in the 19th century. The Erie Canal extends from the Hudson River to Lake Erie at Buffalo. The idea was to get goods back and forth from the Great Lakes to New York City via the Hudson River, which connected with the Erie Canal. The canal was built between 1817 and 1825 and had paid for itself within 10 years. The building of the canal also helped to settle Michigan, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and other states on the Great Lakes. The Santa Fe Trail was a path west traveled by Americans aiming to settle in the West. The trail ran from Independence, Missouri to Santa Fe in what is now New Mexico. The trail opened in 1821, the year Mexico gained its independence from Spain. A decade later, the trail had two main routes, the Mountain Fork, which went through Colorado, and the Cimarron Fork, which went through Kansas. Commercial freighting along the trail was common, including considerable military freight hauling to supply the southwestern forts. The trail was also used by stagecoach lines, thousands of gold seekers heading to California and Colorado, adventurers, fur trappers, and immigrants, just to name a few.